Today from the Global Lane, pro-democracy protesters causing travel chaos in Hong Kong. Tiananmen Square revisited. What's Beijing's next move? Trump backs down on imposing new tariffs for now. Who is hurting more, China or the USA? Heading off to college. Universities protect students from active shooters, but what about protecting them from intellectual terrorism? And are evangelicals abandoning their values for political power? And it's all right here on the Global Lane. Hong Kong may be nearing a breaking point. Pro-democracy protesters have continued for more than 2 months now. Beijing's patience may be wearing thin. Protesters have occupied Hong Kong airport, shutting down all flights, and Beijing has moved troops and tanks close to the Hong Kong border. Well, joining us to discuss the protest is Stephen Mosher. He's founding member of the Committee on the Present Danger, China. Mr. Mosher is author of the book Bully of Asia, Why China's Dream is the New Threat to World Order. Stephen, the Chinese Communist government has labeled the protesters as terrorists. They're moving tanks and troops within about an hour's drive from Hong Kong. Why the harsh words and actions from Beijing?
Well, Beijing is operating a government which insists on total control of its own people. And Hong Kong, unfortunately, is about to come under that total control, I'm afraid. This reminds me terribly much of the months, weeks leading up to the Tiananmen massacre. Remember that in April of 1989, hundreds of thousands of protesters gathered in the streets of Beijing, capital city. And at the end of the day, on June 4th, 1989, the government used troops and tanks to shoot down and run down unarmed protesters. These protesters in Hong Kong are not terrorists, obviously. They're mostly young people, students, young entrepreneurs who don't want to lose the freedoms that they have enjoyed for the last 180 years to the Chinese Communist regime. And yet, under Xi Jinping, there appears to be no room for compromise. Xi Jinping has been tightening control all over China, and now he wants to bring Hong Kong within his grasp as well.
Do you expect that this means Chinese troops may be occupying Hong Kong soon? What's coming?
Well, I think that we may be seeing a bloodbath on the scale of the Tiananmen massacre in 1989. The difference is that instead of in 1989, 100 or so foreign journalists being held captive in one hotel in downtown Beijing. This massacre, this bloodshed will play out in the eyes of the entire world. Hong Kong is wired. There are thousands of correspondents in Hong Kong. There are literally tens of thousands of people who will be recording the violence on their cameras. Anyone who has been watching and following the events of the last 2 months knows that these are almost entirely peaceful protests. The violence has been on the side of the police. The violence has been on the side of the Chinese gangs known as triads, which apparently have been hired by the government or people sympathetic to mainland China to carry out attacks on unarmed peaceful demonstrators. These are provocations used to justify the use of force, and I'm afraid the use of force is coming unless Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party wake up to the fact that if they are going to be shooting and killing people in the streets of Hong Kong, a major metropolis of 7.5 people, in full view of the eyes of the world, their credibility, their respectability, their face in the Chinese sense of the term will be completely, utterly lost for a generation. Make no mistake, there are tens of millions of people in China itself who are looking at Hong Kong with admiration, who are saying to themselves, if I only had the courage of these young Hong Kong demonstrators, I would be out on the streets of Beijing and Shanghai and Guangzhou, China's major cities, demonstrating in the same way that they are.
I've got to talk about our president because he suggested it must be resolved between Hong Kong and Beijing. The protesters want him to be more forceful, of course, against Beijing and supportive of them and their movement. What would you like to see President Trump do?
Having the president say that that the Chinese Communist Party should respect the liberty of the people of Hong Kong and that the issue should be worked out between Hong Kong and China, I think strikes just about the right tone. Remember, China agreed back in 1983, a long time ago, to allow Hong Kong to keep its separate economic, social, and legal system for 50 years. That 50 years should run until 2047. And yet China, Beijing, has already broken that agreement repeatedly over the years. In 2014, they insisted on picking the chief executive, the head of the government of Hong Kong, themselves. And of course, they have their hand-picked candidate there now. They've sent in plainclothes policemen to arrest people who criticize the Chinese Communist Party off the streets of Hong Kong. That's why this whole extradition bill was introduced into the Hong Kong legislature several months ago, and that prompted the demonstrations. The extradition bill was to cover up the crimes of Beijing in arresting people illegally off the streets of Hong Kong. The extradition bill was supposed to allow this whole process to become legal. But make no mistake, if Beijing moves troops into Hong Kong is finished as an international financial center. It is finished as a cash cow for China itself. And all of the corrupt communist Chinese elite who have invested billions of dollars in real estate in Hong Kong and who have companies run out of Hong Kong will lose much of that money if they cause the financial center that is Hong Kong to collapse. So there's a lot riding on the outcome of this.
There sure is. Okay, Stephen Mosher, China expert and author of The Bully of Asia, thank you for your time and insights.
Thank you, Gary.
Remember for a moment what it was like to be a child. You believed every story you were told. You saw a world full of endless possibilities. What stories will the world's orphaned and at-risk children believe? We believe the Bible tells the only story truly worth believing. We believe that every child should have the opportunity to dream, the chance to take challenges and turn them into possibilities, the chance to stand on the promises of God, to recognize their place in the greatest story ever told. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Theirs is a world of endless possibilities. They are looking for a story to believe. We will tell them that story. Will you join us?
China is feeling the pinch from Trump's tariffs, but American companies warn the U.S. economy could start feeling the big hurt from the trade war. So President Trump announced Tuesday he's delaying until December 15th a planned 10% tariff on $300 billion worth of Chinese goods. Some Chinese products won't see an import tax increase at all. They'll be exempt from new tariffs. The tariffs were set to begin September 1st, but the delay affects cell phones and other electronics, clothing, shoes, and toys, all in time for the upcoming Christmas season. An earlier increase of $250 billion worth of Chinese products took effect last May. Dr. Michael Busler is an expert on economics and professor of finance at New Jersey's Stockton University. Dr. Busler, it's always good to talk with you. So what effect are these tariffs now having on China's economy and the supply chain?
Well, thanks for having me. It's always my pleasure to be here. The tariffs are indeed hurting China far more than they are hurting the U.S., and there's a number of reasons for that. When we put the tariffs on, it raises the cost to American manufacturers to produce goods in China. Now, the question is, can they pass those cost increases on to consumers? Data that's been released, in fact, some the Treasury Department just released today, indicates that the price increases are not being passed on to the consumers, and the majority of them, of the the cost increase, is being absorbed by China. And the reason is that if the prices go up too much to consumers, consumers have alternatives, and they may start buying products that are not made in China, indeed made in the U.S., which is part of what President Trump expects to happen. Sales from China to the U.S. have been going down. If they go down any further, it will severely cripple China's economy. Their economy, according to data that they release, and it's difficult to tell whether this is 100% accurate, but according to data that they have released, for the last decade, their economy has been growing at nearly a 10% annual rate, according to their data. Recently released data says that growth rate has dropped down to the 5 or 6% range, which is still fairly healthy growth in most instances, a big drop for China. I think the reality is that China's growth has been hurt more than that, and any more tariffs being put on, causing any more loss of production in China, will cripple them even further. Already we see some companies taking some manufacturing out of China. Some is going to nearby countries in Southeast Asia, like Vietnam. Some of it is coming back to the U.S., and the manufacturing is done not labor intensive, which is done in China, but rather capital intensive manufacturing. We have a lot of robots and artificial intelligence and things. So if China tries to retaliate, which they've done, and raise prices, put tariffs on American goods like agricultural products, that will hurt our soybean farmers, for instance, in the short term. However, it will hurt the Chinese even more. And the reason is China does not have the capability to produce enough food for their entire population.
And it seems American farmers are taking a big hit now that China has placed a moratorium on importing U.S. agricultural products. CNBC had a story, I know, about one Midwest farmer who said after devastating floods this spring and now China's retaliatory measures, it's just not worth it to farm anymore. So how bad is it for the farmers right now? How long do you expect it will last?
Well, farmers have been hit very hard, especially soybean farmers. Now, President Trump is minimizing the effect of that by coming up with an aid package. Most of the farmers that I've heard speak say that while they are being hurt by this, they recognize that this trade war was necessary to open up foreign markets to U.S. manufacturers. We have this huge negative balance of trade. So President Trump said to every partner, we have to renegotiate these trade deals so they're more fair. None of the trading partners were in a hurry to do that because they were in such a favorable position. So what does a business person do? Now remember, President Trump is not a politician. He's learning to be one, but he's not a politician. He's a business person. A business person, when you have a reluctant trading partner, you create a sense of urgency. And that's exactly what the president did. He put tariffs on virtually everything for everybody, created a sense of urgency. Already, Mexico and Canada have agreed to a new trade deal. South Korea has agreed to a new trade deal. Japan and India are talking to us about new trade deals. And finally, maybe for the first time since Richard Nixon normalized relations with China, we have China talking about coming up with a fair trade policy. So you're right, there will be some short-term pain, particularly in the agricultural industry. The president will minimize that with aid packages, but I believe the farmers still support Trump and say, look, after this is over, and we're not sure how long that's going to be, but after this is over, foreign markets will finally freely and fairly be opened up to U.S. manufacturers, not just in the agricultural industry, but in most manufacturing industries, and that in the long term will be a big plus for the U.S.
Okay, Dr. Michael Busler of Stockton University, thank you so much for your insights today.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Give me that. Bye. Sure, life is busy, but I found a way to make a huge difference in people's lives. I guess you could say I'm changing the world right here from home. I bring medical supplies and doctors to people in need, and dig wells so that villagers can have clean and safe water to drink. I make it possible to preach the gospel in over 100 countries, including right here in America. And when disaster strikes, I'm there, providing food, thank you, and emergency supplies to give people hope again. Every day, CBN and I are making the world a better place. Here you go. My life is hectic, so I joined CBN through Pledge Express. My bank does all the work, and I know that my gift is being used where it's needed most. So become a CBN partner and join Pledge Express, because you can do a world of good right from where you are. Hi, good morning. Are you ready to get started?
Hey, if you're tired and exhausted all day, you can't think clearly, and you really just need a cup or even a pot of coffee to get through your day, then join me, Dr. Josh Axe, for this new series where I'm going to teach you how to transform your diet and use essential oils and supplements to get a better night's sleep.
Get Protect Your Sleep and live your best life with innovative information from 5 leading sleep experts.
If you're not a great sleeper, you can do things to make yourself a great sleeper. If you're already a pretty good sleeper, you can enhance your sleep and be even better.
Discover a sleep-enhancing bedtime routine, how to put insomnia to rest, learn how to relieve pain that disturbs sleep, and much more in Protect Your Sleep.
Everything you do better with a good night's sleep.
Wake up to your best life. Call 1-800-700-7000 to get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
Don't miss out on this brand new series.
As parents anxiously or nervously prepare sending their children off to college, some schools and universities are acting to better protect their students from active shooters. When classes start September 3rd at the University of Michigan, students will find many of the classrooms there have new safety locks on the doors. Protecting our children from mass shootings is important. But what about also protecting their minds? Well, here to share about some of the intellectual terrorism on campus is Campus Reform's Ethan Kai. Well, hi, Ethan. It's good to see you again. So let's begin with the University of Virginia. The city there, Charlottesville, is no longer celebrating Thomas Jefferson's birthday, and now they're going after Lewis and Clark. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so at the University of Virginia, there's an ongoing petition to remove a Lewis and Clark expedition statue because they called it a monument to genocide, and they said that it was deeply problematic. And this opposition to historical monuments is getting more and more extreme. At the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform, we've seen time and time again this suppression of history. At Hofstra University, we also saw students try to remove a Thomas Jefferson statue because they said it was a symbol of white supremacy. This sanitization of history doesn't just stay isolated in the college campus environment. We've also seen it manifest itself in communities. San Francisco recently announced that it will remove a George Washington mural because it depicted slavery. The fact of the matter is that we shouldn't be revising history. We should be teaching it.
Yeah, there's a lot in history that we don't like, a lot of bad things, but we still need to teach our young people about it. And I saw that a new survey reveals a lot about who young Americans trust the most. Who did the survey, who did that survey, and what are the findings there?
Yeah, so a new survey out of the Pew Research Center found that young Americans overwhelmingly trust college professors more than key institutions like the military, the police, and also religious leaders. These results should concern us because time and time again, we've seen that college professors abuse their positions of power, they put emotions over facts, and they just, quite frankly, betray our trust.
Well, this is hard to believe. I mean, Why do you think that happened, those results, Ethan? I know when I was younger, our parents and teachers always taught us to have respect for our police, our military, clergy. How could this possibly happen? Why?
I think part of the reason is because these professors are elevated to a position of authority for these students. And just an example of how these professors can, betray our trust. A Pittsburgh human rights professor said that life was better under socialism in Venezuela. And we know this to be false. Their citizens are starving and their economy is collapsing. They're even now fleeing to neighboring countries like Colombia, which have free economic systems, and now they're thriving under those systems.
Yes, it's not a good country right now, and that's socialism for you. At least one professor now is making some headlines about wanting to do away with grades. Tell us about that one.
So a professor out of the New School, Richard Wolff, wrote an op-ed recently that said that we should abolish the grading system for students because it is, quote, capitalism in action, and that it perpetuates harmful concepts like meritocracy. And this shows just how far removed from reality higher education institutions are. Why would students go to school anymore if they aren't asked to prove themselves? Meritocracy is what makes this country so great. No matter what race you are, no matter what religion, no matter what you look like, as long as you work hard and prove yourself, you can achieve something great in the U.S.
Well, I'd like to think that's why we're the #1 economy in the world, because our people work very hard. We work long hours and hardworking, accomplish much. So tell me, what's wrong with a simple pass-fail system?
Well, I think that a lot of these professors are equating this grading system to capitalism. And as we've seen at the Leadership Institute's campus reform, these professors overwhelmingly try to demonize capitalism. And they, quite frankly, fail to acknowledge that capitalism is a system that raises people out of poverty and improves lives. And if you think this doesn't affect you since you're not a college student, just imagine what this is doing to the next generation of American voters. If we aren't even asking 6-year-olds to be graded on whether they can read or not.
Well, capitalism, I think, has worked pretty well for our country. Anything else we should be keeping an eye on, Ethan?
Yeah, so these professors, we need to keep an eye on the radically biased views that they're spreading. We need to hold them accountable for what they're teaching our kids so that the next generations of American voters and American citizens can be informed.
A lot of people are going off to college this month, as a matter of fact, the end of this month, and then more in September. And I'm sure you'll be keeping us on top of it, Campus Reform as well. Ethan Kai of Campus Reform, I know you're heading to Dartmouth College soon. When do you go?
Yeah, I am heading to Dartmouth next year, and I will continue reporting for Campus Reform, continue to expose these biases on college campuses, and I hope to, enjoy my college experience.
Okay, let's talk to you again. All the best, Ethan. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem.
As the nations rage, you can stand with Israel.
History is being written, and I want to be a part of it.
Call 1-800-700-7000 and get to life.
This is our nature as a country.
Discover the untold story of how Israeli volunteers are changing the world.
We consider it our duty to reach out and help others around the world.
For a gift of $10 or more, you can own the acclaimed CBN documentary To Life.
To treat a human, no matter what he is, which religious he have, which color he is, this is what I'm doing.
Support Israel in their time of need. Get to Life, now available on DVD. Call 1-800-700-7000 or log on to cbn.com.
And I wish that other people throughout the world could see this side of Israel.
Orphans Promise is committed to loving and serving at-risk children, to helping keep families together, and to creating opportunities for strong and sustainable communities around the world. We're working in over 60 countries around the world, and with your help, we can do even more. There's an old African proverb I love that says, if you want to run fast, run alone. But if you want to run far, run together. At Orphans Promise, we want to run far so we can touch the lives of as many orphaned and vulnerable children as possible. But we don't want to go alone. We're out to change the world, one child, one family, one community at a time. Will you join us?
A new book by filmmaker Ben Howe caught my attention, and I've got to comment. The book is called The Immoral Majority: Why Evangelicals Chose Political Power Over Christian Values. A synopsis of the book says it demonstrates how the religious right is choosing the profits of this world at the cost of the soul. Are American evangelicals compromising their morals and principles for power and influence? Well, maybe some, but politically, when it comes to this president, most are just choosing the lesser of two evils. For years, Christians sat on their hands in church pews saying, we can't get our hands dirty in politics, we can't associate with the unrighteous. So guess what happened? The unrighteous removed prayer from our schools and allowed abortion on demand nationwide. God has always used the unrighteous to accomplish his purposes, and so are evangelicals with this president. That doesn't mean they like or endorse everything he says and does. King Cyrus worshiped the spirit god Ahura Mazda. He conquered empires and spilled much blood along the way. But Cyrus also freed the Jews from captivity, allowed them to return to Jerusalem to rebuild their temple. Not bad for the Jews. Likewise, Donald Trump has not been bad for American Christians, Israel, and the Jews. Many presidents promised to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and recognize it as the capital of Israel. All reneged on that, except for Donald Trump. None but Trump recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, land crucial to the security of the Jewish state. He has stood up to Israel's archenemy Iran and has aggressively defended the Jewish state at the UN. He's acted to block federal funding of abortions around the world and at Planned Parenthood clinics right here at home. Trump signed an executive order limiting the IRS enforcement of the Johnson Amendment, a law that prohibits pastors and churches from involvement in politics. These are just a few examples, but he's ungodly, you say, and does and says many ungodly things. Well, that's what the Pharisees said about Jesus. Why, he heals people on the Sabbath. He's breaking the fourth commandment. And he keeps company with deplorables, prostitutes, tax collectors. Jesus was perfect. The rest of us are flawed beings. The Bible says all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And so it is with a prodigal son, family member, or friend. We love the sinner, but hate the sin. So how can evangelicals embrace a sinful president, you ask? They embrace righteous policies, not ungodly speech or actions. The president must be called out on those things, just like each of us should be, by loving friends and family. God loves all of us sinners, including our unrighteous leaders. He's put them in power and uses them to accomplish godly purposes. And our Creator will have His way, regardless of how we feel about this president. Well, that's it from the Global Lane. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, and Twitter. And until next time, be blessed.